The world watched a 12-year-old save a plane. Then history was made. The sky stretched out in endless shades of blue, untouched, vast, and beautiful. The soft hum of jet engines filled the air as Flight 292 soared high above the clouds, a silver bird gliding gracefully across the heavens. From the cabin windows, the passengers could see nothing but an ocean of clouds below, illuminated gold by the setting sun. Inside, life was simple, calm, ordinary. Flight attendants wheeled carts down the aisle, offering drinks and smiles. Parents lulled fussy babies back to sleep. Business travelers tapped away on laptops, chasing deadlines even in the sky. Children, restless and wide-eyed, played games on glowing screens. And then there was Ethan Walker. Only 12 years old, Ethan sat quietly by the window in seat 18A, a thick book resting on his lap. It wasn't a novel or a comic book like other kids his age loved. It was a tattered flight manual, dense with complicated diagrams, aviation codes, and emergency procedures. His small finger traced the words as he read silently, lips moving ever so slightly with concentration. His world was not the world of his peers. Ethan's dreams were made of steel wings and roaring engines. Since he could walk, he wanted nothing more than to fly. To the other passengers, he was just another boy, a quiet, nerdy kid lost in a world of dreams. But fate was watching. Fate knew better. The camera would have panned across the cabin, capturing scenes of life, laughter, comfort, obliviousness, all bathed in the golden light of a dying sun. The world was peaceful, secure, untouchable, until it wasn't. It happened in an instant, like the snap of a fraying thread. The first jolt came hard and sudden, rattling trays, sending cups tumbling to the floor. Murmurs of confusion echoed through the cabin. Then came the second jolt, more violent than the first. A baby screamed. A woman clutched the armrest with white-knuckled terror. Overhead bins popped open, spilling luggage into the aisles. Inside the cockpit, alarms screamed louder than human voices. Red lights flashed across the control panels. Autopilot disengaged itself without warning. Altitude meters spun wildly. The pilots, trained and seasoned, found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Their instruments betrayed them, their controls became sluggish, their hands moved faster than their minds could think. In the cabin, a voice crackled through the intercom, forced and shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain calm." But calm was nowhere to be found. The plane lurched again, a gut-wrenching drop that left stomachs behind. Somewhere near the back, someone shouted a prayer. A stewardess lost her footing and crashed into a seat. The world inside that aircraft changed from comfort to chaos in mere seconds. And yet, in the middle of it all, Ethan Walker sat frozen, not with fear, but with a different feeling altogether. Focus. His heart pounded against his ribs like a drum. His mouth went dry. But somewhere deep inside, another part of him woke up, the part he had been feeding with endless hours of studying, practicing, dreaming. He watched the subtle tilt of the wings, the unnatural way the engine strained, the blinking patterns of the emergency lights. It all spoke to him, in a language he somehow understood. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. In that moment, where grown men and women wept and prayed, a 12-year-old boy made a decision. He would not sit still. Ethan shoved the flight manual into his backpack, pulled off his seatbelt with trembling fingers, and stood up. His mother screamed after him, grabbing for his arm. His father shouted his name, terror sharp in his voice. But Ethan didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The aisle stretched before him like a battlefield, littered with open bags and fallen cups. People clung to their seats as if the plane itself might tear apart. Every step Ethan took felt heavier than the last. His legs shook. His mind screamed at him to go back, to sit down, to be a child again, small, powerless, safe. But his heart said, go. The camera would capture every beat of that impossible walk, a boy, dwarfed by towering adults, pushing forward into the jaws of fear itself. Around him, the plane creaked and shuddered, a wounded giant trying desperately to stay alive. Ethan didn't know exactly what he would do when he reached the cockpit. He didn't know if they would even listen to him. But he knew he had to try. Because somewhere in the chaos, beneath the roaring engines and panicked cries, he felt it. A call, undeniable and ancient. You were made for this. The camera would linger on his hand as it reached for the cockpit door, his small knuckles knocking once, twice, before it opened just enough to reveal the storm of panic inside. Beyond that door, history waited. And a 12-year-old boy was about to change it forever. The door cracked open, just enough for Ethan to glimpse the chaos inside. The cockpit, usually a place of quiet precision, now boiled with confusion. Warning lights painted the walls an urgent red, casting eerie shadows over the pilots' faces. The captain barked orders, his voice tight with desperation, while the first officer wrestled with a joystick that refused to obey. Behind them, manuals lay scattered across the floor like fallen soldiers, as if somewhere along the line, even the books had given up. Ethan stood frozen for a heartbeat. He had imagined this room 1,000 times in his dreams, but never like this. Never with death breathing so close, never with the weight of hundreds of lives pressing invisibly against his shoulders. Then, slowly, the captain turned and saw him. At first, confusion flickered in the captain's eyes, a 12-year-old boy, standing in the cockpit doorway, wild-eyed and breathless. He opened his mouth to shout, to demand he leave, to throw him back into the cabin where children belonged. But before a word could form, Ethan spoke first. "There's a manual override switch, under the panel by your right knee," he said, his voice shaking but determined. I think the primary system's locked in a feedback loop. You have to disengage it manually." The captain blinked. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the way Ethan said them. Not like a scared child guessing at something he didn't understand. No, he spoke like someone who had seen this before, lived it 1,000 times in simulation, in study, in dreams. Still, hesitation hung thick in the air. This was insane. They were trained professionals, and he was a boy. But then, a tremor in the wings. The plane dipped again, sharply. An alarm blared louder, and the ground loomed closer on the radar. They were out of time. The captain's hand moved, almost against his better judgment, reaching under the panel exactly where Ethan had said. His fingers found a recessed switch, one he hadn't touched in 20 years of flying, a backup system buried so deep that most pilots never even thought about it. For one agonizing moment, nothing happened. And then the trembling stopped. The joystick responded. The plane steadied, ever so slightly, like a wounded animal catching its breath. A breathless silence filled the cockpit. The first officer turned, eyes wide, and simply stared at Ethan. How? Why? Ethan didn't wait to be thanked. His mind was still racing, calculating, scanning. He pointed to the secondary thruster systems. They're not balanced. You need to redistribute thrust manually. And watch the left stabilizer, it's not responding fully. The captain nodded, moving fast now, following Ethan's urgent words. It felt insane, it was insane, but every instruction the boy gave worked, like finding the right rhythm in a failing heart. Together, they battled the dying systems, second by precious second. The plane's descent slowed, from a deadly drop to a controlled glide. Not perfect, not safe, but enough. Enough to give them a fighting chance. Back in the cabin, the passengers clung to hope like a lifeline. Mothers whispered prayers into small ears. Elderly men clutched the hands of strangers. Flight attendants, tears streaking their faces, kept moving from aisle to aisle, helping, comforting, pretending to be braver than they felt. None of them knew that at the heart of the storm, a child was steering fate with trembling hands and a heart full of fire. Time blurred into something strange, something elastic. Every second felt both impossibly fast and unbearably slow. But gradually, steadily, the plane leveled out. The nose tilted upward. The monstrous alarms dulled into softer warning chimes. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a fragile thread of hope. The captain turned again to Ethan, voice hoarse, full of something that sounded like awe. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan," he said, still staring at the instruments. "Ethan Walker." "Ethan," the captain repeated, as if committing it to memory, as if it mattered in a way that went far beyond this single moment. "Stay right there. You're doing great." Outside the cockpit window, the endless expanse of clouds thinned, giving way to patchy views of Earth below, tiny rivers winding through fields, roads stitched across hills like scars. Civilization. Safety. Life. The crew radioed an emergency alert to the nearest tower. "Mayday, Mayday, Flight 292, system failure, partial manual control regained. Request emergency landing." Voices answered back, calm and clipped, promising every runway, every hand, every ounce of help they could offer. But in truth, no help mattered more than what had already happened. No air traffic controller could have done what Ethan Walker had done. Inside the cockpit, the final descent began. Ethan glanced down at the control panel one more time, noting the readings with a quiet authority far beyond his years. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply kept going. One breath, one heartbeat at a time. Because he knew it wasn't over yet. Not until wheels touched Earth. Not until every mother hugged her child. Not until every family was whole again. And so, with the weight of hundreds of souls resting invisibly on his small shoulders, Ethan stood his ground. Silent, focused, unbreakable. The narrator's voice would return here, softer, almost reverent. Heroes aren't born in comfort. They're forged in fire. And sometimes, the smallest among us carry the greatest light. As the runway lights appeared in the distance, shimmering through the dusk, the final battle to land safely began. And at the center of it all, unseen by the world, unthanked by the terrified hearts in the cabin, stood a boy who had answered a call not even he fully understood. History had not crowned him yet, but fate already had. The world outside blurred into a tapestry of lights as the ground rushed closer. Inside the cockpit, the air crackled with tension. Every word, every movement felt sharpened by fear and necessity. The captain's knuckles turned white against the control yoke. The first officer's eyes darted between failing instruments in the approaching runway. Ethan stood to the side, silent now, but fully alive, watching, thinking, feeling every pulse of the dying aircraft as if it were an extension of his own body. The final moments of Flight 292's descent had begun. The plane shook violently again as the landing gear groaned into position, a tortured sound that echoed through the cabin, striking new fear into hearts already stretched to breaking. One of the wheels wasn't locking into place properly. Ethan caught it instantly. He had seen the warning flicker across the auxiliary panel before even the captain noticed. He leaned in, voice low but urgent. Cycle it manually. Use the hydraulic backup. Quick, before final flare. The captain didn't question him now. There was no time for pride. No time for disbelief. In a crisis, you trust those who see clearly when others are blind, even if they're just 12 years old. With trembling fingers, the backup system engaged. The stubborn gear snapped into place just seconds before the final approach. In the cabin, terror held every breath captive. Parents squeezed their children so tightly it hurt. A woman clutched her wedding ring and whispered promises to a husband waiting at home. The elderly man who had once traveled the world sat with eyes closed, seeing, perhaps, all the places he would never visit again if these next seconds went wrong. A flight attendant knelt in the aisle, murmuring desperate prayers she hadn't spoken in years. Tears fell freely. No one pretended anymore. The city lights grew closer, shimmering through tears and fear and the thin, desperate hope that still clung to every soul aboard. The runway appeared ahead, a thin silver lifeline in the vast darkness. The captain's voice cut through the intercom, cracked but steady. Brace for landing. The words fell like stones into the cabin. Ethan's fingers tightened around the seat edge as the captain lined up the approach. Even now, the left stabilizer shuddered unpredictably, throwing them off balance. Every instinct screamed at Ethan that this was not going to be a smooth landing. No gentle kiss to the tarmac. No triumphant cheers. This would be brutal, hard, survival by inches. He saw it coming before anyone else. And yet, he stood his ground. The final moment stretched, slowed, every second thick with unbearable weight. The tires hit the runway with a bone-jarring crash. The plane bounced once, then slammed down again, harder. Sparks erupted from the wheels as brakes locked and tires screeched. The fuselage rattled like it might tear itself apart. Screams filled the cabin, raw, helpless, human. The captain fought the controls with every ounce of strength he had left, aided silently by the boy whose quick eyes and quicker mind had already saved them 100 times over in this endless night. The plane careened down the runway, veering dangerously to the side. Emergency vehicles chased alongside, lights flashing in frantic rhythm. And in the cold, electric night, as sirens sang and engines cooled and families reunited, a boy named Ethan Walker walked into a future that none of them, not even he, could yet imagine. The cold night air wrapped around Ethan like a shroud as he stumbled down the aircraft stairs, blinking against the blinding floodlights that painted the runway in stark white. Beyond the barricades, a sea of flashing cameras and frantic voices waited like a storm about to break. Reporters shoved microphones toward every survivor stepping off the plane, desperate for the first word, the first trembling account of what had happened aboard Flight 292. But Ethan saw none of it. All he could hear was the distant echo of the alarms, the screaming engines, the quiet, steady voice inside him that had kept him alive. Every step he took felt strangely weightless, like he wasn't truly walking but floating, untethered, in a story far too large for him. His mother gripped his hand like she would never let go again. His father walked stiffly beside them, his free hand moving protectively to Ethan's shoulder. Around them, the The survivors moved like ghosts, draped in airline blankets, faces stunned, bodies trembling, a strange blend of euphoria and exhaustion radiating off them in waves. It wasn't long before the authorities found them. A tall man in a dark suit approached, his badge flashing in the harsh light. His face was kind, but his eyes were sharp, the eyes of someone who had seen tragedy too many times and was still amazed by the miracles that sometimes slip through. "Are you Ethan Walker?" he asked gently, kneeling down to Ethan's height. The boy nodded, his voice locked somewhere deep in his throat. "We need you to come with us for a moment." "It's okay, your parents can come too. There are some important people who would like to talk to you." Before Ethan could process it, he was being ushered through the chaos, past the broken plane that still steamed in the distance, past the stunned faces and clicking cameras. Whispers followed him, growing louder by the second. "That's the kid. He saved the plane. 12 years old. Can you believe it?" The world had found its hero. Inside a hastily assembled command tent, warmth hit him first, heaters buzzing, radios crackling, people speaking in low, urgent voices. Medical staff hovered close, offering water, blankets, gentle hands. But the real center of gravity stood at the far end of the tent, a group of men and women in dark suits, earpieces coiled at their necks, all gathered around a phone. A woman with stern eyes approached, her voice formal but not unkind. "Ethan, sweetheart, the president would like to speak with you." For a long, frozen moment, the world tilted. The president? Somewhere in the back of his mind, a boyish part of Ethan expected to wake up any second, safe in his bed, the whole night nothing more than a strange and impossible dream. But this was no dream. Trembling, Ethan took the phone handed to him. It felt heavy, like holding something sacred. He pressed it to his ear. "Hello, Ethan," came the voice, strong, clear, unmistakable even to a boy who had never thought he'd hear it firsthand. "This is the President of the United States." Ethan couldn't breathe for a second. "Why, yes, sir," he finally managed, voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause so heavy it felt as if the entire world leaned closer to hear. "I want you to know," the president said, voice thick with emotion, "you are a hero, Ethan. Not just tonight. Not just to those passengers. To this entire nation. You showed us courage, heart, and brilliance when the world needed it most." Tears burned behind Ethan's eyes, but he blinked them back fiercely. "We are all so proud of you," the president continued. "And I would be honored if you would join me at the White House. We want to celebrate your bravery properly. Will you do that for us?" Ethan swallowed hard. His throat ached. His knees felt ready to give way. He looked at his parents, their tear-streaked faces glowing with pride, nodding through their own disbelief. I'd be honored, sir," Ethan whispered. The president chuckled warmly on the other end of the line. "Good. We'll see you very soon. Get some rest, hero. You've earned it." The line clicked dead, and the room exploded into a different kind of chaos, quiet cheers, hurried phone calls, security planning, media statements. Ethan stood at the center of it all, dazed, still clutching the phone like it might vanish if he let go. The world outside the tent had already shifted. His name was spreading across screens and airwaves, a wildfire of awe and wonder. Ethan Walker, the boy who saved Flight 292. And though he felt small, lost inside the bigness of it all, somewhere deep in his chest, past the fear, past the exhaustion, was a tiny ember of something new. Not pride, not fame, but purpose, a knowing. Tonight had changed him forever, and tomorrow, the whole world would know his name. The days that followed moved like a storm. Ethan barely remembered the drive away from the airport that night, how the black SUVs shielded him from the flashing cameras, how police escorts cleared the road ahead, how his parents sat on either side of him, clutching his hands so tightly it almost hurt. He was carried, swept along by something far bigger than himself. And by morning, the world knew his name. News anchors choked back tears as they recounted the story. A 12-year-old boy, against impossible odds, saving hundreds of lives. Clips of the broken plane played on a loop, its crumpled landing gear, the scorched tires, the stunned passengers emerging into the night. But it was Ethan's face. Captured in a single grainy photo, wrapped in a silver blanket, wide-eyed and solemn, that gripped the world by the heart. Social media exploded. Hashtag Ethan Walker trended worldwide within hours. Messages poured in from every corner of the globe, from astronauts on the International Space Station to children writing crayon-drawn letters saying, "You're my hero." And through it all, Ethan remained silent. Not because he didn't care, but because something deep inside him understood this wasn't about fame. It wasn't about being a sensation for a week, a month, a year. This was about the choice he had made in that moment, standing in the doorway of the cockpit, heart pounding, and deciding not to turn away. Heroes, he realized, weren't born in flashes of glory. They were made in quiet, terrifying moments when nobody was watching. Still, there was no stopping the tidal wave now. 3 days later, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit too big for his small frame, Ethan boarded a private plane bound for Washington, D.C. The flight itself was surreal, pilots coming out to shake his hand, flight attendants speaking to him with the same reverence reserved for legends. When they landed, a motorcade was waiting. Ethan watched from the car window as monuments blurred past, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, shining like sentinels in the late afternoon sun. He tried to imagine all the people who had stood here before him, the leaders, the dreamers, the warriors, and the thought made his chest tighten. What am I doing here? He thought. I'm just a kid. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't just anything anymore. As the car pulled to a stop before the White House gates, Ethan caught his first glimpse of the gleaming columns, the perfectly manicured lawns, the towering American flag rippling in the breeze. The heart of a nation. And tonight, he was being welcomed inside. Security was tight, but gentle. Agents guided him and his family through gleaming halls lined with portraits of history, paintings of presidents who had shaped the world, who had faced wars and revolutions, victories and heartbreaks. Ethan felt their eyes on him as he passed, as if they, too, were waiting to see what he would become. Finally, he was led into a grand room where golden chandeliers threw soft light across velvet drapes and polished floors. A small stage had been set up at the far end, lined with the American flag. At the center stood the president himself. He wasn't the distant, untouchable figure Ethan had seen on TV. No, he looked real. Solid. Kind. The president smiled warmly as Ethan approached, his footsteps echoing loud in the hush of the room. Reporters stood clustered at the edges, their cameras flashing like tiny stars, but Ethan barely noticed them. All he saw was the outstretched hand waiting for him. He took it. The president leaned down, speaking just for Ethan to hear. You remind us what courage looks like, son. Thank you. Then he turned to the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying strong and proud through the room. Today we honor a hero not because of his age or his fame, but because when the world asked the unthinkable of him, he answered. The room erupted into thunderous applause. It filled Ethan's ears, shook his bones, wrapped around him like a great invisible wave. Somewhere in the crowd, his parents stood, tears streaming down their faces, clapping until their hands were raw. A medal was pinned to Ethan's chest, bright and heavy and real. The Presidential Medal of Courage, created just for him. As the ceremony ended, and as he stood there blinking into the flashbulbs and the cheers, a strange stillness settled over Ethan. He realized something. This wasn't the end of his story. This was only the beginning. Somewhere deep inside, a fire had been lit, not the kind that burned out after a single night of heroism, but the kind that burned forever. The kind that whispered, you were given a gift. Now use it. And as the doors of history swung open around him, Ethan Walker, the boy who saved Flight 292, took his first step into a future larger than he had ever dared to imagine. And the world, watching, held its breath once again. The weeks after the ceremony felt like another world. Ethan had grown accustomed to the flash of cameras and the hum of reporters' voices, but there was an odd kind of peace in his quiet moments. The endless interviews and speeches had faded, leaving behind a strange stillness. A quiet weight had settled into his chest, a weight that whispered of new responsibilities and challenges. And yet, as he sat in his room at home, staring out the window at the setting sun, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change again. He had done the unthinkable, saved the lives of 300 people, and in doing so, had become a symbol of courage. The whole world had watched. His name had been etched into history. But the hardest part, Ethan realized, was not the fame. It was what came next. Every day, new offers arrived, book deals, speaking engagements, even calls from universities. People wanted him to be the face of something, the emblem of hope for a world that seemed broken in so many ways. But Ethan didn't want that. What he wanted, what he needed, was to go back to being a kid, to feel the world through the eyes of someone who had yet to grow into the weight of the world. But now, the world looked at him like he was something more, something beyond what he could understand. He wasn't just Ethan Walker anymore. He was the hero. And that realization gnawed at him. But one thing was certain. He hadn't done what he did for the attention. He had acted because, in that moment, something inside him had known. It wasn't bravery or thought-out strategy. It was instinct. He had simply done what needed to be done. But now, even as his parents tried to shield him from the media frenzy, Ethan began to sense the weight of expectation, not just from others, but from himself. The calls didn't stop. Advisors came by, offering a future they claimed would change the world. College scholarships, foundations with his name, invitations to speak before world leaders. But every time Ethan stepped into those rooms, stood before those crowds, he felt like an imposter, a small boy pretending to know what a hero was supposed to look like. It was the president's call that shattered the final semblance of normalcy. One afternoon, after an exhausting interview with a major news outlet, Ethan's mother had been waiting for him by the door with a letter in her hands. The envelope was thick, the seal unmistakable. It was from the White House. His heart raced. "Open it, son," his mother said softly, her voice filled with both wonder and concern. Ethan sat down, his fingers trembling as he peeled the seal away. Inside was a personal letter, written on official White House stationery. The president's words were kind, but with them came a request that felt as heavy as the skies during the crash. He was invited to join the president's advisory council on national safety to help design new training programs for pilots, to speak about what he had learned that night. It wasn't just an offer, it was an invitation to reshape an entire part of the country's future. And with it came the weight of an entire nation's eyes. Every step would be scrutinized. Every word would matter. Ethan's world tilted again, only this time there was no slowing it down. That night, as he lay in bed, his mind spun like the engines of the plane. He thought about the people on board Flight 292, about the faces of the crew, the passengers, the lives that had been altered, and the ones that hadn't made it. And then there was his family. His parents had done everything they could to protect him, but could they really shield him from this? The responsibility was overwhelming. How could a 12-year-old boy know what was best for an entire country? The next day, his parents drove him to a small park near their house. It was one of those places where time slowed, where the world felt distant, almost like it belonged to another life. They sat together on a bench, the autumn leaves drifting around them like a gentle reminder of how fragile everything was. "You don't have to do this, you know," his father said, his voice steady but filled with care. "You don't have to carry all this on your shoulders. You can just be a kid." Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. He had been trying to balance the scales between the boy he used to be and the weight of the man the world wanted him to become. "I didn't want any of this, Dad," he said quietly. "But I also can't pretend like it didn't happen, like it wasn't real." His mother leaned over, wrapping her arm around him in a quiet embrace. "You've always been our hero, Ethan. But no one expects you to be perfect. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to follow your heart." Ethan stared out at the horizon, the orange glow of the setting sun reflecting in his eyes. The world was a much bigger place now. And though he couldn't yet see the path ahead, something inside him knew that he would walk it on his terms. The phone call that came later that evening, offering him a chance to address Congress, felt distant, as if it were happening to someone else. He wasn't sure yet if he was ready for that kind of responsibility. The weight of those expectations loomed over him, suffocating, yet inviting him to step into the unknown. It wasn't just about the future. It was about who Ethan Walker would choose to be, not just in the eyes of the world, but in his own. The choice was his. And, somehow, for the first time in weeks, that thought felt like freedom. The weeks rolled by like a relentless tide, pulling Ethan further into the life that had been thrust upon him. The world no longer saw him as a boy. They saw a beacon, a symbol, a savior. And though it wasn't something he had asked for, it was something he had to face. Each day, Ethan woke to the hum of his new life, the calls, the meetings, the endless stream of people who wanted a piece of him. He had become something of a global commodity, a commodity made from one single, unforgettable moment when he had saved hundreds of lives. But that moment, powerful as it was, had begun to feel distant. What had once been instinctive, a decision made from the heart, was now constantly dissected, analyzed, and turned into something bigger than himself. Everyone wanted a piece of Ethan Walker, but nobody wanted to understand who Ethan really was. The boy who had made that heroic choice in the cockpit now felt lost in a world that had become all too large for him. He spent more time in the conference rooms and on planes than in his own home. At night, his parents tried to shield him from the noise, but the weight of it followed him into his room, into his thoughts. He had done something no one expected, but now the expectations felt like chains. It wasn't just the media that weighed on him. It was the fear, deep inside, that he would never be allowed to be just a kid again. The fear that his world would always be this stage, filled with eyes on him, waiting for him to be perfect. One night, weeks after the ceremony at the White House, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of his backyard. The night air was cold, biting at his skin as he looked out over the neighborhood. It was quiet now, the kind of silence that made him feel like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. In his hand, he held the Presidential Medal of Courage, the very medal that had been pinned to his chest in front of the entire nation. It gleamed under the moonlight, a symbol of everything he had done, everything he had become. And yet, as he held it, Ethan couldn't help but feel the same emptiness he had felt ever since the night of the crash. It was like the medal was nothing more than a hollow thing, a symbol without meaning. He closed his eyes, allowing the cool breeze to wash over him. Why does this feel like a burden? The question echoed through his mind, drowning out the noise of the world. He should be proud. He had saved lives. He was the youngest person to ever receive such an honor. He should be basking in the glory. But all he wanted was to go back to the way things had been before the crash, before the world had descended on him, before the weight of expectation had stolen his peace. He opened his eyes again, glancing down at the medal. For a moment, it felt like the only thing in the world that mattered. "Hey, champ," came his father's voice from the doorway. Ethan's father stood in the frame, his face soft with concern but not yet the sadness Ethan had learned to expect. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Ethan nodded silently, still staring at the medal in his hand. His father came and stood beside him, looking out over the same dark yard. "You've been quieter lately," he said, his voice a mixture of love and worry. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on him. "I don't feel like me anymore, Dad. I feel like I'm being pulled in all these directions. I'm not just a kid anymore. I'm a symbol. I'm the face of bravery, the face of hope, and it's not me. It was never supposed to be me." His father's eyes softened, understanding flooding his face. "I get it, son. You didn't ask for any of this. And what you did that night, that was pure instinct. You were just being you. But now the world sees you as something bigger, something they need, something they want." Ethan clenched his jaw, holding back tears. "I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted to help." "I know," his father said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But sometimes, Ethan, the world calls on you when you least expect it. You can't control that. You did something incredible, something that saved lives. And that's going to follow you for a long time." Ethan's chest tightened. "I don't know how to be what they want me to be. I don't know if I can carry this, Dad. I don't know if I can do it all." His father sighed deeply, his voice turning softer, almost a whisper. "You don't have to do everything, son. You only have to do what feels right to you. Whatever path you take, we'll be here. We've got your back. But you don't have to be anyone you're not." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a crack in the armor that had been slowly building around him. He closed his eyes, feeling his father's hand on his shoulder, the warmth of his presence grounding him. Maybe it was okay not to have all the answers. Maybe it was okay to be uncertain. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his own shoulders. The sound of his phone vibrating in his pocket interrupted the moment, a reminder that the world was still waiting for him to answer. Another call, another request, another invitation to speak. But for now, Ethan turned off the phone and placed it on the grass. He didn't need it. Not right now. What he needed was the freedom to breathe. The freedom to be just Ethan. Looking up at his father, he nodded slowly. "I'm still figuring it out," he said, the first words of acceptance he'd spoken in days. His father smiled, pulling him into a quick, warm hug. "And that's okay, son. That's okay." For the first time since the crash, Ethan felt the smallest flicker of peace, a flicker of hope that he could still be the person he needed to be. Not a hero, not a symbol, just Ethan. Months passed. The world moved forward, as it always does. News cycles shifted. New heroes were crowned. But Ethan Walker remained, not as a fleeting headline, but as something deeper. A quiet reminder that even the smallest among us could change the course of history. He never returned to the blinding lights of endless interviews. He didn't chase fame or fortune. Instead, Ethan found his place where it mattered most, helping others, quietly, humbly. He spoke to young pilots, sat with nervous trainees, told them not about glory, but about heart. about the moments that would define them when no one was watching. He grew, year by year, not into the hero the world had demanded, but into the one he chose to be. A boy who became a man not through medals or headlines, but through the simple, powerful choice to stay true to himself. And somewhere, in the quiet hours of the night, when the stars hung low and the world seemed endless, Ethan Walker would sometimes look up, smile, and remember the boy who once saved a plane and, unknowingly, saved himself. The world hadn't just watched history that night. They had witnessed the beginning of a legend,